The acrid smell of burnt rubber and ozone still clung to the air, a grim reminder of the accident that had shattered young Matt Murdock's world. The radioactive waste, a viscous, sickly green sludge, had splashed across his eyes, searing away his sight. He was just a boy, barely old enough to understand the complexities of the world, yet thrust into a reality where the familiar was now shrouded in darkness. The screams of his father, Jack, the Devil Murdock, still echoed in his ears, mixing with the strange, tingling sensation that was rapidly transforming the very nature of his perception. Matt didn't know it yet, but the world wasn't just becoming darker. It was becoming louder, sharper, and more vibrantly textured than ever before. His remaining senses were surging, an overwhelming cascade of information that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He could hear the flutter of a pigeon's wings across the street, the subtle shift of a newspaper in a distant hand, the almost imperceptible heartbeat of the people around him. It was a symphony of sensations, a world reimagined in sound, smell, and touch. Jack Murdock, a washed-up boxer with a heart of gold buried beneath layers of gruffness, was plagued by guilt. He'd been strong-armed into extorting money for Eddie Foreman, a local mob boss with a reputation for cruelty. The sight of his son's blindness, the consequence of a world he'd helped create, was a punch to the gut that finally knocked sense into him. This wasn't the life he wanted for Matt, nor was it the life he wanted for himself. He resolved to abandon his life of crime and once more chase the dreams he'd let wither. He dedicated himself to his boxing career, a desperate attempt to provide a better future for his son, a future untainted by the darkness he'd once embraced. Jack's training was brutal, his focus honed by the remorse that gnawed at him. His fists, calloused and scarred, moved with a newfound determination. Matt, meanwhile, was navigating a world of shadows, learning to trust his newly heightened senses. He learned to use the rhythmic tapping of his cane to map his surroundings, his ears picking up the echoes and nuances that painted a vivid picture of the world around him. He began to see the world in a way that most could not, a tapestry of vibrations and frequencies, a realm of almost magical perception. Jack's comeback was a spectacle, a phoenix rising from the ashes of a career seemingly over. He moved with a ferocity fueled by his love for his son, winning fight after fight, becoming a local hero once again. However, the truth was far more insidious. Fallen, seeing an opportunity to further control Jack, had bribed his previous opponents, ensuring his victories. Jack, however, was a man now committed to honesty. He refused to throw his next match when Fallen demanded it, drawing a line in the sand that would seal his fate. Fallen, betrayed and furious, had Jack murdered, an act of brutal finality that would forever alter the course of Matt's life. The news of Jack's murder hit Matt like a physical blow. He felt it in the sudden silence that fell over his world, the absence of his father's heartbeat, the lingering scent of his aftershave that still clung to his clothes. This wasn't a loss, it was a tearing apart, a wound that would fester and grow with time. In his grief and rage, a resolve began to take root, a need to ensure that what had happened to his father would never happen to anyone else. It was in this crucible of loss that the seeds of Daredevil were sown. Years flew by in a blur of legal studies, the musty smell of old books, and the comforting rhythm of the courtroom, a stark contrast to the shadowy world Matt was beginning to explore in the evenings. He graduated from law school, partnering with his close friend Franklin "Foggy" Nelson. Together, they established a small law firm in Hell's Kitchen, a neighborhood teeming with both crime and resilience. They were a peculiar pair, Matt, the quiet, brooding legal mind with his heightened senses, and Foggy, the jovial, sometimes clumsy, heart of the operation. They dedicated their practice to providing pro bono legal representation to those who had been failed by the system, believing that even in the darkest corners of the city, justice could still prevail. But the law, with its slow, often frustrating progress, couldn't reach the truly dark corners. Matt grew increasingly aware of the criminal underbelly that plagued the city, a network of corruption and violence that remained largely unchecked. Thus, the mantle of Daredevil was born. Clad in his crimson costume, his movements fluid and precise, a dance of controlled chaos, he became the guardian of the night. He patrolled the rooftops, using his echolocation to map the city, his heightened hearing allowing him to discern the faintest whisper of criminal intent. The streets of Hell's Kitchen became his hunting ground, a battleground where the forces of justice and the shadows of crime were locked in a perpetual dance. Ben Urich, a seasoned reporter at the New York Post, was drawn to the stories of this new vigilante. He chronicled Daredevil's exploits with a mixture of skepticism and admiration, his articles sparking curiosity throughout the city. He began to investigate the dark figure known only as the Kingpin, the elusive mastermind who allegedly controlled the vast network of organized crime. He wrote of the Kingpin's insidious influence, his reach extending into every corner of the city, a shadow that seemed to devour everything in its path. What Urich didn't know, what no one knew, was that the Kingpin was, in fact, Wilson Fisk, a brutal man who hid his monstrous nature behind the facade of a legitimate businessman. Matt, juggling his daytime persona as a lawyer and his nocturnal identity as Daredevil, found himself drawn to a new presence, a magnetic force that both captivated and unnerved him. Elektra was a whirlwind of fierce intelligence and raw physical power, a Greek-American woman whose martial arts skills were as breathtaking as her beauty. Their connection was instantaneous, an intoxicating blend of shared intensity and mutual understanding. Matt felt a bond with her that he had never experienced with anyone, a sense that she saw the darkness in him and somehow understood it. He did not know, however, that she was the daughter of Nicholas Nachos, one of Fisk's most trusted lieutenants. Their love story was a tempest, a fiery dance of passion and danger. They trained together, their bodies moving in a symphony of strikes and parries, the air crackling with their unspoken desires. But their bond was also built on secrets and lies, a precarious foundation that was bound to crumble. Elektra, caught in the web of her father's allegiance to Fisk, became torn between her love for Matt and her loyalty to her family. As Matt's double life began to take its toll, his nights became increasingly fraught with peril. He came to know the sound of fear, the metallic tang of blood, the chilling laugh of villains who reveled in the suffering of others. He faced off against street thugs, corrupt cops, and hired killers, each confrontation a test of his skills, each battle a reminder of the darkness he was fighting to contain. But none of his enemies was as dangerous, as unnerving as Wilson Fisk. Fisk, realizing the growing threat Daredevil posed to his criminal empire, began to take steps to eliminate the vigilante. He employed the services of Bullseye, a merciless hitman whose aim was preternaturally accurate, an individual who could kill with anything from a bullet to a playing card. Bullseye was a force of nature, his movements precise and deadly, his mind a twisted labyrinth of violence and calculated cruelty. He was sent to kill Nicholas Nachos, Elektra's father, when he tried to sever his connection with Fisk. In a cruel twist of fate, Bullseye used Daredevil's own weapon, the modified baton, to impale Nicholas, framing the hero for the murder. Elektra, overcome with grief and rage, sought vengeance, her heart hardened with the belief that Matt had betrayed her. She became a force of nature herself, a whirlwind of grief and fury, seeking only to punish the man she believed had killed her father. She tracked Daredevil down, ambushing him in the dark, her eyes burning with hatred. She engaged him in a brutal fight, her movements savage and relentless, pushing him to his limit, finally incapacitating him by stabbing him through the shoulder. Matt's pleas of innocence fell on deaf ears, his attempts to explain his situation lost in the hurricane of her emotions. In an act of desperate defiance, she ripped off his mask, revealing his face, realizing to her shock that Daredevil was Matt. The shock of realization was almost enough to stop her heart. She stared at his face, seeing not the cold killer she had envisioned, but the man she loved, the man she had shared her deepest secrets with, the man she had come to trust. Before she could fully process this revelation, Bullseye attacked once more, tracking Elektra down on the order of Fisk and ending her life with his uncanny precision. Matt was forced to watch in horror as the life was ripped from the woman he loved, her body collapsing before his very eyes. His scream was lost in the roar of the city, a cry of pain and despair that seemed to echo into the very depths of hell. Wounded and heartbroken, Matt sought refuge in a church, his body and soul battered and bruised. He found himself kneeling before the altar, his head bowed in supplication, the scent of incense and old wood filling his senses. He felt like he had failed everyone, that everything he held dear had been stripped away from him. Bullseye, however, was not finished with him. He tracked Matt to the church, exploiting his weakness to loud sounds, a cacophony of church bells that assaulted Matt's heightened senses, sending him reeling. The police arrived just as Bullseye was about to land the killing blow. The church was surrounded by flashing lights and the frantic shouts of law enforcement. Bullseye, in a final act of depravity, revealed the truth about Jack Murdock's death, telling Matt that the Kingpin was responsible, leaving behind a single rose, Fisk's calling card. The revelation struck Matt like a hammer blow. The truth, so ugly and brutal, crashed down upon him. The man he was hunting, the man he was determined to bring to justice, was responsible for the death of the man who had given everything to him. Matt, fueled by rage and grief, unleashed a primal fury. The pain of his wounds faded to the background as his anger took hold, a cold, focused rage that pushed him beyond his limits. He fought with a savagery that even surprised himself, his movements becoming almost animalistic. The arrival of a sniper who managed to shoot Bullseye through the hands, robbing him of his deadly aim, gave Matt the opening he needed. He grabbed Bullseye and threw him from the bell tower, sending him crashing down into the night, a testament to his fury and his determination. The night was far from over. Matt, knowing the truth, was now driven by a singular purpose: to avenge his father and Elektra. He ambushed Fisk in his opulent office, the air thick with tension. The clash was a titanic struggle of contrasting styles: Fisk's brute strength against Matt's enhanced agility and awareness. The fight was long and brutal, a symphony of shattering glass and groans of pain. Fisk's imposing form, his sheer physical presence, was a formidable obstacle. But Matt had something that Fisk could never have: a knowledge of the man he was fighting, a complete understanding of his opponent's weakness. The moment came when a sprinkler head burst, drenching Fisk in a torrential downpour. As the water cascaded over him, Matt's sonar sense lit up with a sudden, sharp clarity. He could see Fisk in a way that no one ever had, a vibrant picture of sound and vibration. He had stripped away the layers of deception and finally revealed the true man behind the mask. The knowledge of Fisk's vulnerability was the final key to victory. He used his sonar hearing to maneuver around Fisk's heavy strikes, landing a series of precisely targeted blows. Fisk, weakened and defeated, finally confessed that he had killed Jack on Fallen's orders, and that Elektra's death was a mere casualty in the larger game. As the police stormed the office to arrest Fisk, the villain threatened to reveal Daredevil's identity to the world. But Matt, his mask still hiding his face, simply pointed out that no one would believe that Daredevil was a blind man. It was a final act of defiance, a moment of triumph in the face of unimaginable loss. Matt had won the battle, but he knew that the war was far from over. Sometime later, Matt stood on the roof of his apartment building, the place where he and Elektra had shared their first kiss. He could still feel the lingering warmth of her presence, the phantom touch of her lips against his. As he looked up at the night sky, lost in the swirling vortex of memory, he noticed something on the ground. A single object, glinting in the moonlight, Elektra's necklace, the one she always wore, with her name engraved in Braille. It was a whisper of hope, a subtle suggestion that she might still be alive. Could she have survived Bullseye's attack? He had seen her die, yet the necklace seemed to tell a different story. The mystery lingered, a faint ember of hope in the vast darkness of his grief. Meanwhile, Ben Urich, torn by his journalistic instincts and his growing respect for Daredevil, struggled with the moral dilemma of exposing the vigilante's true identity. He had painstakingly pieced together the puzzle, realizing that Matt Murdock, the quiet lawyer who had appeared out of nowhere, was indeed the Daredevil who patrolled the city's rooftops. He prepared an article that would reveal everything, a story that would undoubtedly shake the city to its core. He sat in his office, the words on the page staring back at him, a testament to his journalistic zeal, but something held him back. A deep-seated belief that Daredevil was, in fact, making a difference in the city, a beacon of hope that kept the darkness at bay. In a moment of surprising self-awareness, he crumpled the article into a ball and threw it away, choosing to keep the truth of Daredevil's identity a secret. He walked out of the New York Post building and into the night. He looked up, catching a glimpse of Matt on a nearby rooftop, his crimson costume a stark silhouette against the city skyline. He nodded to the hero, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding, a respect that transcended words. "Go get him, Matt," he murmured under his breath. Matt, sensing Urich's gaze, gave a slight nod in return, and with a burst of sudden movement, leaped off the building, disappearing into the night. The city, with its infinite labyrinth of shadows and light, had called to him again. The fight was far from over, and the devil of Hell's Kitchen would be there to answer. In the shadows of a heavily guarded hospital room, Bullseye lay bandaged and broken, his body a patchwork of scars and stitches. His eyes, however, still held that unnerving gleam of madness. He noticed a fly buzzing nearby, and with a sudden burst of movement, grabbed a syringe needle and killed the fly with a single precise stab, his movements still carrying the signature precision of his deadly aim. His story was far from over, the seeds of chaos sown. Matt's journey was an ongoing exploration of grief, justice, and identity. It was a story of a man who had been pushed to the limits, who had been forced to confront the darkness within and the darkness around him. The streets of Hell's Kitchen were still filled with shadows, but the devil was there, a silent guardian who was always ready to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The city would continue to test him, break him, challenge him, but the devil would always rise to meet the call, because the echoes of his past continued to resonate deep within his soul, a constant reminder of what he was fighting for and the man he had become.